The peace that followed the total eradication of the Carthaner at Zama Prime was not a time of rest, but a feverish era of industrial expansion. For the citizens of Earth, the sky was a canvas of safety, but for those who lived on the Limes Galacticus, the edge of the Roman frontier, the universe had begun to feel cold. The Limes was guarded by the speculators' listening posts, monolithic, rectangular graphene needles drifting in the absolute zero of the Ophiuchus sector. These stations were the eyes and ears of the Empire, equipped with digital augers, quantum processors capable of detecting the gravitational wake of a single atom from a light year away. In the year 2776 AUC, of Urb Condita, the augers began to scream. It wasn't the rhythmic pulse of a civilized fleet. It was a cacophony of white noise, a metallic roar that devoured radio frequencies and turned the tactical maps into static. Reports from the furthest outposts described a distortion of the horizon, as if a giant shroud of rusted iron was being drawn across the stars. Then, one by one, the outposts fell silent. No distress signals were sent. No ship escaped. A territory encompassing 30 inhabited systems simply vanished from the Imperial network. Rome realized that a predator of a different nature had crossed the threshold, one that did not seek to conquer, but to erase. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss any updates. On Earth, the Galactic Senate convened within the Curia Julia, a hall where gravity was a suggestion and time was measured in centuries. The debate was fierce. Senator Claudius of the Optimates argued for a defensive perimeter around the inner core, suggesting the frontier was already lost. But Legatus Aetius Valerius, a man whose skin was scarred by the radiation of a dozen suns, stepped into the holographic well of the Senate. "You speak of walls," Aetius thundered, his voice amplified by the ship link in his spine. "But the enemy we face does not recognize walls. They are not a nation. They are a migration of entropy. If we do not break them at the Catalonian plains, there will be no Rome left to defend. There will only be a graveyard of iron." The Senate relented. The decree of Razboi total war, was issued. The forges of Vulcan Station were ordered to cease all civilian production. For 60 days, the star Trajan was dimmed as its energy was diverted into the assembly of the Catalonian Response Force. This was not just a fleet, it was the largest concentration of heavy kinetic mass in human history. The enemy was officially designated as the Void Horde of the HUNI-GOTH. If the Romans were the masters of geometry and order, the HUNI-GOTH were the gods of chaos. They were a nomadic species that had spent eons drifting between galaxies, surviving by parrotizing the technology of others. Their fleet was a visual blasphemy. They did not build ships in shipyards. They shackled them. A typical HUNI-GOTH capital ship was an asteroid the size of a city, hollowed out by plasma drills and encased in the rusted carcasses of stolen freighters and conquered stations. These masses were held together by kilometers of magnetic iron chains, pulsing with a dull, malevolent orange light. Their propulsion was an environmental crime. Dirty fusion reactors that bled radioactive isotopes and gamma rays, leaving a trail of toxic space behind them. They moved like a swarm of locusts, stripping systems of their ores, their gases, and their history. At their center was the Scourge, the flagship of Attila Nur, a cyborg entity that had merged his consciousness with the junk heap processors of 1,000 dead worlds. Legatus Aetius Valerius knew that a conventional engagement in open space would be suicide. The Horde relied on overwhelming mass. They would simply ram the Roman lines and drown them in millions of tons of scrap. To win, Rome had to turn the environment into a weapon. He chose the Catalonian sector, a region dominated by a massive amber nebula. This was not a cloud of soft gas, but a high-density vortex of ionized silica dust and metallic microparticles. In this nebula, long-range targeting was impossible. Radars were blinded by static, and energy shields were constantly eroded by the abrasive dust. In the mist, size does not matter, Aetius told his officers. Precision does. We will force them into a melee where Roman discipline will act as our radar. We will move as one, strike as one, and die as one. The Roman fleet was restructured into the Formatio Phalanx Stellaris. The Hastati vanguards were equipped with oversized, reinforced magnesium-ceramic bow shields. The Principe's dreadnoughts, the black graphene rectangles, were loaded with Pila, 50-meter-long tungsten rods tipped with antimatter triggers. The Roman fleet entered the nebula in total silence. The orange fog pressed against the viewports of the Eterna Victrix. The only light came from the blue flicker of the gravity compensators and the rhythmic hum of the bridge's life support. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. Out of the amber gloom, the first chains lunged. These were not mere tethers. They were kilometer-long serrated cables of rusted iron, propelled by magnetic harpoons. The Principe's-class ship Invictus was the first to be hit. A massive chain wrapped around its rectangular hull with a screech that vibrated through the very atoms of the crew's armor. "Contact! Port side!" the Centurio roared. The fog erupted with fire. Thousands of HUNI-GOTH junk ships, looking like jagged teeth, swarmed out of the amber clouds. They didn't fire lasers. They launched industrial drills and plasma cutters, trying to physically tear the Roman ships apart. The melee was a nightmare of physics. Roman ships were being dragged into the scrap mass of the Horde, where asteroids slammed into their graphene hulls with tectonic force. But Aetius' training held. Even as their gold filigree was stripped away and their hulls groaned, the Roman captains waited for the command. "Launch Pila! Now!" The magnetic rails of 100 ships screamed in unison. The tungsten spears, the Pila, were launched at relativistic speeds. They didn't explode on impact. They punched through the asteroid hulls, severing the internal chains and detonating the unstable fusion cores at the center of the junk ships. The nebula was lit by a series of orange and white suns as the HUNI-GOTH fleet began to dismantle itself from the inside. In the heart of the storm, the Scourge appeared. Attilaner's flagship was an asymmetric monster 20 kilometers long, a mountain of 10 enmeshed asteroids held together by glowing orange chains that looked like a burning nervous system. It lunged for the Eterna Victrix with a terrifying, jerky momentum. The two flagships collided in a crash that created a temporary gravity well, sucking in nearby debris. Rusted iron met matte black graphene. The Scourge's chains began to constrict the Eterna Victrix, crushing the outer armor plates and shattering the Doric columns of the observation decks. On the Roman bridge, red emergency lights bathed the black marble in the color of blood. Systems were at 30%. The atmosphere was thinning. Space legionaries were thrown across the bridge as the ship tilted under the weight of the monster. Aetius Valerius stood firm, his boots locked into the floor. Through the front window, he could see the glowing orange eye of Attilaner, a massive sensor array on the Scourge. "He thinks we are trapped," Aetius whispered. "He does not understand the meaning of triarii." The triarii, the heaviest, oldest dreadnoughts of the fleet, had been waiting in the dense fog behind the Victrix. On Aetius' command, they linked their targeting processors to his own neural link. They didn't fire at the Scourge. They fired through the Eterna Victrix's own reinforced shield pylons, using the flagship as a massive lens for their combined antimatter batteries. A focused beam of pure white fire erupted from the Roman line. It didn't just strike the Scourge, it vaporized the space between the two ships. The orange chains melted instantly, turning into clouds of molten iron. The asteroids, no longer held together by the magnetic fields, were pushed apart by the sheer pressure of the antimatter reaction. Attilaner's mountain of scrap began to bleed fire. The internal dirty reactors went critical, creating a chain reaction that rippled through the junk mass. "Surge forward," Aetius commanded. "Break their spine." The Eterna Victrix, scarred and battered but structurally sound, activated its primary gravity drive. Its prow, shaped like a massive golden axe, cut through the heart of the dying Scourge. The resulting explosion was so immense it cleared the Catalonian nebula for 100 kilometers in every direction. For 5 seconds of absolute glory, the Roman fleet stood revealed, damaged, dark, but in perfect, rigid formation, surrounded by a ring of expanding orange fire and the pulverized dust of 1,000,000 barbarians. The chaos had been silenced by the math of Rome. As the amber nebula slowly reclaimed the sector, the Roman fleet began its slow exit. They did not cheer. There were no victory songs, only the rhythmic clicking of repaired drones and the silent prayer for the fallen. Aetius Valerius looked at his scarred gauntlet. The Horde had tried to bring the universe back to its primal, chaotic state. They had failed because they encountered a wall of will that was harder than the graphene they flew in. Centurio, Aetius said, looking at the retreating orange clouds. Ensure the Pulvis Mortis is deployed. I want this sector salted. I want no one to ever remember that a chain was once forged here. The vulturous nanobots were released, a black cloud that began to eat the remaining scrap metal, turning the glory of Pila into invisible, inert soot. The Catalonian plains were quiet once more. Order had been restored, but the price was written in the jagged edges of the Roman hulls. They had looked into the face of entropy and didn't blink.